I suppose having grown up in a time where our population has just grown repeatedly, even though, as we know, the white British population aren't really producing. We're having high levels of immigration, and we've generally seen the global population increasing. There seems to be this assumption that for any kind of thriving society, we need a growing population. Do you believe that?
I have complicated views about population growth. So, I mean, I'm going to speak actually at the end of this month at the Natalism conference in Austin, Texas, which is organized by this group called Exit Group that's run by a friend of mine called Kevin Dolan. They're Mormons. Mormons have a high birth rate, right? Mormons reproduce, as do a lot of religious minorities in the US, the Amish in particular. I think you occasionally see these very funny kind of population extrapolation graphs where they're like, in 2300, then there will be 400 million Amish in the US and stuff like that. But so anyway, this conference, the Natalism conference, and it's about the problem of falling birth rates in the West. What can we do to arrest the decline without resorting to the politicians' favorite solution, which is, of course, just replacement migration, just ship in millions of people from the third world. And I mean, so I spoke at this conference. The first one was last year, and I spoke about endocrine disruptors, these really unpleasant hormone disrupting chemicals that are everywhere, absolutely everywhere, and have various unpleasant fertility reducing effects and negative health effects, from reducing testosterone to causing genital abnormalities and miscarriages and all this kind of stuff. But this time I'm kind of thinking a bit more philosophically about the nature of the problem, because I'm fairly convinced, certainly looking at the example of Hungary, but also looking at historical examples as well, including ancient Rome, that actually you can't just pay people to have children. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't seem to be the case that you can just give people economic incentives to have children. So, Hungary's Viktor Orban is kind of poster child actually for kind of right-wing government, for creative right-wing government in the West. He has, Hungary had a terrible, terrible birth rate, like the lowest, I think, in the EU. And he wanted to do something about that because, the alternative, he wanted to do something about that without resorting to mass immigration. He wanted Hungary still to be Hungary. Well, you've got to have children. So what does he do? Well, he gives tax breaks to young people. He says, if you get married and you have X number of children, 2, 3, 4 children, you actually end up not paying any tax. So it's like you can actually, if you have 4 children, as a woman, you don't pay any tax. Interest-free loans for young couples, so they can start a household, buy a house, buy a flat, have somewhere to live. Because that you would think that would be one major kind of disincentive to having a family, not having a stable home, not owning your own property, etc. Well, what's happened? Well, there's been these measures were brought in, I think, in about 2017. The birth rate in Hungary is barely increased. It's increased a tiny amount. And actually, it's impossible to know whether the increase is due to a broader economic recovery after the 2008 financial crisis. So Hungary was very badly hit by the financial crisis, as were a number of other neighboring countries. And they've all seen corresponding increases in the birth rate in recent years. So it actually looks like all it is it's kind of like broader economic recovery. There's no way that you can say that these much touted pronatal measures that Viktor Orban has brought in have actually had any effect whatsoever. And then the comparison is with the Roman Emperor Augustus, first Roman emperor. There was a problem with the birth rate. Native Romans weren't reproducing, and he brought in similar measures. He tried to incentivized people to get married, to have children, and he also tried to disincentivize. So various kind of sort of shame-based methods, to make people feel ashamed of not having children, not getting married, spinsterhood, with all that kind of stuff. So, but that didn't work either. And so my argument, I talk about Bronze Age pervert, about Bronze Age mindset. So there's a very famous, it's become very famous, this aphorism in Bronze Age mindset. I think it's aphorism number 16, so it's in the first part of the book, where he says, chimp in the state of nature never jerks off. What does this mean? And he talks about the fact that actually it only seems to be in captivity that monkeys end up masturbating. And he's making a parallel. Well, what he's basically saying actually is that we are chimps in a zoo. Human beings are chimps in a zoo. The modern world is basically is a prison, really, and we're in captivity. And he doesn't really go into great detail about that, but I kind of pick that up, and I kind of make some speculations about the nature of modern existence, and whether there's kind of like a much deeper spiritual malaise that might explain why people aren't having children. And it's quite open-ended, but basically my conclusion at the end of this speech that I'm going to give is that there is a deep spiritual malaise. There is like a metaphysical malaise, and unless we can find some way to address that, I don't think that for all the good intent in the world, we're not going to get people to have more children, no matter how much money we throw at them. And another example of that is South Korea, of course, where South Korea is going to disappear within a generation or two. The birth rates are so low, and they're throwing huge amounts of as much money as they can throw at young people to get them to have children, and it's just not working. And I think if you know anything actually about what life is like in South Korea, it's pretty hellish. Actually, it's not pleasant. It's not pleasant for various different reasons. Economically, it's very hard, but also there's just a kind of there is a kind of spiritual malaise that's quite obvious there too. So I think fundamentally that actually if we don't want to have to rely on mass immigration to sustain a positive birth rate, and that is what countries like Britain and Germany and countries actually throughout the Western world are doing. In Canada, for example, then they have this insane plan called the Century Initiative that's backed by various politicians, former prime ministers, where they want to get the population of Canada to 100 million by the end of the 21st century, right? The population is 40 million now, and it's all mass immigration. It's just like we are going to import hordes of people from outside the Western world, and we'll end up with 100 million people in Canada by the end of the century. But there won't actually be any Canadians in Canada anymore. I think it's difficult. And so I think that the case actually needs to be made for population retrenchment. I do. I think that we are going to reach a point where actually, if we don't want to have to rely on mass immigration, if we want to maintain our actual identity, our actual, our countries as they are or as they were, and we can't get people to have enough children. You can't get native people to have enough children, and like I say, it's just not easy. It's just not easy. Then I think that what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to make a case for degrowth, for population decline. And actually, up until now, then the Japanese have been doing that reasonably well. Japan is held up as a sort of object example of an aging population decline, etc. But they've actually been quite clever up to now about things, and they've embraced automation and tried to find ways around decreasing population. But now I think actually they've started to open their doors to mass immigration, and they're taking in lots of Indians and Malaysians and things like that. So who knows? But I think that the worship of growth at all costs will be the death of the West. Yes, I do. I think that if we can't actually find a way to break our addiction to mass immigration, and we are addicted to mass immigration because it makes the lines on the graph go up, and that's all that matters. GDP, population growth. I mean, why should Britain have a population of 70 million people? I mean, Britain is already overcrowded. I mean, you'll get these retarded conservative commentators, people like that guy Tom Harwood. He'll fly into Britain from wherever, and he'll take a picture out of the plane window, and he'll say, "Oh yeah, country looks full, doesn't it? Because it's open fields." I mean, there's a certain class of person who would happily see the entirety of the British Isles concreted over and turned into housing for immigrants. But yeah, I mean, it's a complicated. I mean, I think it's a complicated problem, and it's not one that can be. There are no easy answers. There are no comfortable answers to this. It's like, we've lived this way now for however long, for a century, maybe more. Where we've worshipped growth, we've worshipped positive growth, and we've actually reached this tipping point, inflection point, whatever you want to call it, where if we continue along that path, we will destroy ourselves, and things will be totally different. And there just isn't an easy solution to it.